Thank you for listening to Southern Gospel Journal. My name is Daniel Mount, and I am joined today by Pat Barker. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing wonderful. Absolutely.
Great. So I figure almost everybody who would tune into a Southern Gospel podcast knows who you are, but just in case somebody's just happens to stumble across this conversation, who is Pat Barker?
Don't ask my wife. Um, I'm a guy who loves this music. I grew up loving it, since I was a kid and always wanted to sing it. I mean, I really did, even though, my education or whatever leaned more towards classical or opera or whatever. In the back of my mind, I always knew if the Lord was willing, I was going to do this for a living. So I love the music. I love the church. I love the subject matter. And so I've been doing this for 20 years, not counting the local groups and things like that I've had the honor to sing with. But 20 years down the road and still able to do it. And you know what's funny? You were the very first person to ever interview me
Mm-hmm.
when I started singing full-time gospel music. So this is kind of full circle here, Daniel. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
20 years down the road, baby.
We are. I think
It's been
it is
18
20 years.
years.
Yeah. And it's been
18
20
years since
years.
I
Yeah.
joined the Dixie Echoes.
Mm-hmm. And I had been blogging at that point for 2 years because I started 20 years ago this year.
Wow.
Yeah, I started up a series where I interviewed people as soon as they joined groups, and there were a number of people who, were there for a year or two and moved on to other parts of their life, and that's great. And a number of people I made a connection with doing that, reaching
Yeah.
out to people who had just joined groups, who I'm still in contact with years later. It's been a
Yep.
blessing.
That's awesome.
So in this conversation, we're not going to do the standard walk through the details of your life up to this point. I can
Thank
actually
you.
link to the old interview I did back then, and there are other podcasts and other places where you can see it. So I thought we'd talk about something a little different today, which is just talking about the eras and culture of Southern Gospel. I thought that'd be a fun conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's start with the earliest era, which is the singing convention shape note songbook era. And so I'll say, by way of introduction to this era, before the mid 1930s, Southern Gospel was more, if you will, a participatory sport than a spectator sport.
Yeah.
Now, by the mid 30s, you had groups like the Chuck Wagon Gang and Blackwood Brothers starting to make a name for themselves and singing daily programs on radio that was broadcast across the country. But before about that point, even though there were full-time quartets since 1910, the culture, I think, was more oriented around singing conventions and buying songbooks to learn and sing the latest songs yourselves. So my first question is, do you think this era is gone forever, or do you think something like Gerald Wolfe's Hymn Sing Tour might be the first step toward a return to those days?
I don't think they're over. I certainly don't think they're as strong as they were. I mean,
Hmm.
really, you nailed it. The whole genre was built around those songbooks and around convention style singing. I mean, that's what it was in its earliest forms.
Hmm.
And I was able to be a part of those early hymn sings for probably the first 3 or 4 years I was on that tour. And I did get to see the excitement of people who just got to hold a hymnal in their hands
Hmm.
and sing the parts.
Yes.
The more the church moves into contemporary and kind of just sing the melody and just, you know, that honestly, the more that the church becomes a spectator sport, the more we will move towards a participatory sport. And that's what I see in a lot of the modern churches is really they're spectators. They're not singing as much. They're letting the praise band do most of the work. So when you go to a Gerald Wolfe hymn sing or any kind of hymn sing that's doing a red back or whatever, man, the excitement level is still there for people who
Hmm.
love to sing along. They love to hear all the voices around them. But it's something that they miss. So I would probably honestly maybe go back a little bit further than Gerald's hymn sing
Hmm.
and give some credit to Gaither music
Yeah.
because so much of their concerts were built around people singing along. I remember I went to see the Gaither homecoming way back, and the whole concert ended with Bill up on stage by himself singing, loving God, loving each other. and he dismissed everyone, and there was probably 15,000 people in the auditorium, and everyone's walking out singing, loving God, loving each other, a cappella, like they didn't want it to stop. So the whole
Yeah.
crowd is still singing that chorus as the stage has cleared. So I think that really helped, that Gaither tour and that Gaither style of concert, and then, of course, Gerald has taken it, to another level and gone to other countries, of course. So I don't think it's
Mhm.
dead. It's certainly not as strong as it was in the early 1900s, but, it's still there for sure.
Yeah. So, of course, by post World War II, 40s and 50s, you have groups change things over completely to, James Vaughn sent quartets on the road to sell songbooks. That was what
Right.
they sold. That was how they paid the bills to keep the group on the road. But, there was this period from the mid 40s through maybe 10 or 15 years ago when selling recorded music worked really well for groups. And selling recorded music has not worked so well in the age of streaming.
No.
Uh, could you imagine a future where groups might start carrying songbooks again, and where that
You know
might
what?
come back? Just come back.
I think if it did, it would, I don't think we'll ever get back to the day where it's just a pure songbook.
Hmm.
I
No,
do
yeah.
believe that there's a few groups who even tried it recently, where it's a combination of a songbook and a picture book and a autograph book and
Hmm.
they're trying to be innovative because it's true, CDs don't sell near what they do. I mean, we do a special with the group I sing with, like 4 CDs for $30. I mean, it's as cheap as you can make it, and you still have to hold them out and go, "You sure you don't want this?"
Hmm.
And what they come up and say, they go, "I just don't have any way to play it. I don't have any
Yeah.
way to play it in my car." So we do sell a lot of USBs, and we have a lot of people who say, "I stream your music on Apple or Spotify or whatever." So the age of the CD is quickly coming to an end. But as far as songbooks go, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I'll have someone come up and ask if we have songbooks. We don't have as many people who play the piano anymore.
Hmm.
We don't have as many people who care about singing all the parts as they used to. And so, I think songbooks, sure, but it's gonna have to be one of those where it's a special, you got
Hmm.
some pictures in there and you got some autographs and you've got things like that to go along with it.
So, just from a standpoint of what the fans want, they're not there yet, except for when it comes to singing classic hymns, maybe. But for groups'
Yes.
new songs, not there yet. But maybe
No.
someday, maybe that'll
I
come
would
back.
hope so. I love to listen. I've got a ton of songbooks from the cathedrals and Squire Parsons and all these folks who put out songbooks with every album. And I remember George would hold up the songbook to sing one of the songs. Now, of course, now we know he was just helping to sell it, but they
Hmm.
weren't actually reading it. But the songbooks were very, very important up until maybe the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, I'd say so. I have a fair number of those songbooks myself. So moving on to the next generation, the generation of the World War II veterans. You know, culturally in our country, we call the generation that won World War II the greatest generation. Is it fair to call it Southern Gospel's greatest generation too?
Um, Probably. If you look at innovators, if you look
Hmm.
at people who set the groundwork for
Yeah.
what we do now, absolutely. I mean, they were trendsetters. They were forward thinking. I mean, those ideas that those folks came up with then are still holding up today. And so, if I'm looking at folks who put in the work and put in the sweat and the blood and the tears and they also put their mind into it and their whole self and they were doing 250, 275, 300
Hmm.
days a year traveling in cars and you know buses and just trying to get from one place to another. Absolutely, I would have no problem labeling that generation the greatest.
Because you almost have two phases of this generation, I feel like. You've got the first phase of um, Hovey Lister and Jake Hess and James Blackwood and RW, the Statesman and Blackwood brothers who really hit the ground strong just a couple years after World War II and had major national success. and they kind of helped invent the genre
Sure.
as we know it today, like redefine it from the singing convention era to what we know today. But then you also have in that same generation the group of people who, and give or take, I'm not saying every one of them's World War II veterans, but within roughly that same age, you have the people who were doing 300 dates in a beat up car and hardly anybody knew them in the 50s.
Oh,
And
yes.
then maybe 60s or 70s, you have Les Beasley and the Florida Boys. Um, you have George and Glenn with the Cathedrals, Rex Nealon, a couple guys with the Kingsmen, you name it. They like it wasn't just the 40s and 50s Southern gospel. The 60s and 70s was largely defined by groups in that same generation, but people who maybe had been paying their dues in a beat up car and then
Right.
hit it bigger and got the bus in maybe the
Right.
60s or 70s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, I said this a minute ago, but do you think it's accurate or do you think it's oversimplified to give the Statesman and Blackwood Brothers and their record label a lot of the credit for changing Southern gospel from being a songbook driven industry to an artist driven record label and live concert industry?
No, I don't think it's oversimplified at all. I mean, you have to give most of the credit to the Blackwood brothers and the Statesmen. James Blackwood was really a genius, a
Hmm.
person when it came to um, not only putting groups together, but the business side of it.
Hmm.
And he was the one who I think, I wasn't there obviously, but who really pushed JD to be that kind of business thinking, forward thinking, songwriting, all of those things that JD's known for. James was one of those kind of mentors for him as well. So you put James, you put Hovey, you put both of those groups together on the road,
Hmm.
doing tours together. I mean, those kind of things, absolutely. They should get the bulk of the credit for moving it from convention to live concert. Absolutely.
And then I think when you have JD coming behind and being one of the main driving forces, if not the main, behind establishing the National Quartet Convention, um, that helped, ironically enough, make it to where the Statesman and Blackwoods weren't the only two names people knew.
Right. That was a great, of course, idea that's still going strong today. I think it was
Hmm.
1957, I think, when the convention started. And it wasn't just, your mainline top name groups. There were some of those who were beating the roads, and JD knew they were good, and James knew they were good. And so let's give them a platform. And I think the Quartet Convention still does that today. Now,
Hmm.
there'll be people, and it's so funny to me, who complain and go, "Why don't we just have top name groups, or why don't we just have the?" Well, it's never been that.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what convention they went to, but it's always been, let's have some of those top lines, but let's bring in some of those groups that are going to be the next generation and the next.
One of my favorite NQC stories goes back to when the Rambos first started taking off.
Mhm.
Um, I guess it was JD still running. He'd heard them. Whoever was running NQC at the time had heard them and invited them to sing on main stage, and they went from hardly anybody knowing them to. I actually talked to Buck Rambo one time before he passed away, and he said that they left that year's quartet convention with a full slate of dates for the next year. Their
Wow.
entire next year was booked, and from there they went to become one of the mainstays of the genre. NQC
And
broke them in.
and to show that that still happens, we did the very first hymn sing at convention.
Hmm.
Ben Spear was on stage.
Oh wow.
I was up there. This goes back. And the Mylan Hayes family was up
Hmm.
there, and the kids were just teeny-tiny and
Oh,
all
they
that.
were tiny when they started.
So Gerald really pushed them
Hmm.
during that afternoon showcase and said, "If you're gonna buy 1 CD this week, you go to the Mylan Hayes family and you buy that project and you get everything on their table." Well, they did. The people literally
Hmm.
sold out the Mylan Hayes family, and now here we are a decade plus later, and their favorite mixed group and favorite this, and they're touring everywhere and making these incredible albums. So, that attitude is still there to where we want to help those who are really they're they're putting the work in. They're
Hmm.
paying their dues. They are doing it the right way, and the higher ups, the ones who make the decisions, are still wanting to push them. That has been the case since 1957, and it's still the
Yeah,
case, and I love it.
it is a blessing because it would have been easy for the Statesman and Blackwood brothers to try to make Southern gospel almost a monopoly.
Yep.
And in fair fact, for a few years, nobody came close to touching what they could do, and they were on tour together, and it was
No,
it was amazing music. But they realized as much as everybody else that their style of music was going to be stronger if there were other groups that people loved, and that's just
absolutely.
been a special thing about our style of music.
I agree.
I'm going to throw in a little shout out here. If somebody, and I'll try to remember to put it in the description of the video. Um, if you haven't ever seen it, back when I worked for Crossroads, I recorded a video of the Hayes Children in the studio of the Hayes Children singing "Something More Than Gold," an old
Oh,
hymn.
wow.
And the fun thing is, the twins, one's voice had changed, one's hadn't. It's just a cool moment, a cool little snippet of history, and Kennedy's just a tiny little peanut singing her high
She was
part there.
so tiny.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Just to have seen them when they were that little, and
Absolutely.
see what they've become. Okay, so moving on to the next era, we can talk about the 60s, 70s, maybe into the 80s for a couple minutes. And we already talked about how National Quartet Convention helped build Southern gospel from just its Statesman and Blackwood days. Singing News probably deserves some credit, and then we have the record companies, like
Mm.
Heartwarming. Had artists like Bill Gaither Trio, Spear Family, Rambo's, Imperials, Stamps, and Oak Ridge Boys. And then you have Canaan. Marvin Norcross founded it in 1965, and he signed artists like the Happy Goodmans, Inspirations, Kingsmen, Florida Boys, Lefevres, then Neelands, Couriers, and Cathedrals. So, what are thoughts you have on this transition beyond what we've already talked about? How these different record companies and Singing News and NQC, and are there other people who deserve some credit for
Uh,
building Southern gospel and like what we know it today?
I would say so, and I would say the Quartet Convention was a great kickoff for the '60s.
Yeah.
I'd give credit to the convention and to those guys. And then, of course, the creation of the bus and those kind of things that
Hmm.
made traveling a lot easier. So you could go a lot further and do a lot more. Those kinds of things. Of course, JD gets credit for that. The record companies, absolutely. Going out and finding this young talent, like a Gaither Trio and all of
Hmm.
these groups that you named, Lefevre's and so on and so forth, and giving them a place that they can shine and they can do the things they need to do. And then, Singing News, I think, was in '69, I
69,
think.
70, some, I think 69, but then
Yeah,
70 was the first fan awards, maybe?
yeah, so
Sounds right. Yeah.
I would give Singing News a lot of credit, but then we can't forget, Daniel,
Hmm.
right in the middle of the decade, we had a little thing called the Gospel Singing Jubilee,
Yes.
and I'm telling you, to this day, if you go on Reels and you're just flipping through your Reels,
Hmm.
if I see something from the Gospel Singing Jubilee, I stop and
Yeah.
I watch it. And it's fun and it's fresh. And it introduced a lot of folks all over the world to gospel music, to traditional gospel music, what we then, what turned into Southern gospel music, the Florida Boys and the Dixie Echoes and the Happy Goodmans and the Rambos, and you wanted to see who was going to come up on those steps and sing. And so I would give a lot of credit
Hmm.
also to the gospel singing Jubilee and Les Beasley and those folks who put that forward. So yeah, you put all of those things together, that is a perfect storm where everything has kind of just come to a place that it's really starting to shine and people are starting to see it.
Yeah. I would agree. Good shout there. Now I've heard that by the 70s, you had some of the top Southern gospel quartets were kind of competitive with each other, and I don't mean to say there's anything wrong with that, but you hear some of those stories.
Oh, they
Uh,
were competitive.
yeah, but and then again, not there's anything wrong with that, but
Sure.
today, and this is not entirely a contrasting thing because sometimes you get brothers in the family are more competitive with each other than anybody else they ever know. Um,
Sure.
but today, there's a really strong sense of Southern gospel as a family. And I don't think there's any one turning point when everything changed. Because as you say, in the 50s and 60s, you have Quartet Convention bringing on new groups and the record labels and Singing News platforming new people. But do you have any insight in how the culture changed through the years and this sense of Southern gospel as a family started coming about?
I would think, if I'm going back in my mind, I would say there's an ebb and flow, and it depends on how much you need each other.
Mhm.
So let's go back to the convention days.
Okay.
They desperately needed each other. And
Mhm.
so they were all in. Let's all work together. Let's all do this together. And then you might see a point to where maybe groups are starting to break off and they don't need each other quite as much.
Mhm.
And now we have the competition starts to set in because I need to outsell you. I need to outdo you. I need to, the crowd needs to react more. I need to get three standing ovations if you got two standing ovations.
Mhm.
And we can say that didn't exist. Absolutely, it existed. And then you had people who came in, like, say, the Happy Goodmans and those family groups that were more church oriented, but you've still got the Blackwoods and the Statesmen who are more live stage oriented. And, one of the Statesmen actually said, we used to be able to go into all these auditoriums till the Happy Goodman showed up. And now we got to sing in all these churches. So, sure, there was that sense of competition. And I think that really honestly kept going until the Gaither
Mhm.
era kicked in, and you've got 200 people in a room together singing. I think that really brought about a sense of family, community, and I think that carries on to today. Honestly, I would give Gaither a lot of the credit for that, and I'm sure there was competition within all of that.
Mhm.
I wasn't there, so I can't speak to it. But I know even today, my goodness, you'll get on the bus and somebody might say, "Man, I was just shocked. We did better than so and so. I just didn't see that coming, but man, crowd really loved us." So it's still in the back of your
Mhm.
mind.
Sure.
How did you do compared to someone else? But I don't think that is a bad thing.
No, it's
I
not.
think you do. I'm not trying to cut your legs out from under you,
Mhm.
but it's okay if we make each other better.
Yeah.
If it becomes a thing of pride, sure, that's where it falls apart. But there's no problem with if I know I'm singing and then Gold City's coming after me, I want to set it up so Gold City is successful. And
Mhm.
then Gold City needs to set it up to where the Hoppers are successful or triumphant or name any of the groups. That's our job is if I'm opening, my job is to make your situation better.
Yeah.
And if I'm closing, my job is to close it out and to make it the greatest closing that that you can have. So, in that sense, competition is still there, but that's healthy. I don't think there's
Yeah.
any problem with that.
Now, along similar lines, uh, I think there's really no way around saying that the members of the Blackwood Brothers and Statesmen in the 50s and 60s, they were stars.
Oh goodness,
And
yes.
and I don't mean it in a bad way. Like they just
No,
were. And I read somewhere that in their peak years, there were years when the Statesmen didn't mingle with audiences before concerts to increase the impact when they hit the stage.
right,
And not that this wasn't the case then, not that Southern gospel artists weren't approachable then, because after the concert's another story, and you have everybody else on the road in a beat up car when JD Sumner has the first bust.
right.
But now Southern gospel artists are probably the most approachable and friendly people in any genre of music. And do you have any insight into how that part of the culture developed?
Not a ton. I think when I would go see the cathedrals,
Hmm.
okay, um, Ernie and Scott would be at the table when I walked in. When I went to see the Stamps, Ed Hill and Ed Enoch would be at the table
Hmm.
when I walked in. If I'd go see the McCameys, same thing. But Peg wasn't out there. George and
Hmm.
Glenn weren't out there. JD was not out there. The stars, uh, stayed back. That's how I viewed them. That's not, they didn't call themselves stars. That's
Sure.
how I viewed them. So they stayed back, and it was a major impact when they walked out on stage and you got to see them for the first time. And so I don't really have a problem with some folks not coming to the table, but I do believe in an era where it's much more difficult to sell. uh,
Hmm.
You're going to the table because you need to try to sell something. You need to try to make a connection with folks before they get out there. With our group, Dale Forbes, he does the t-shirts, so he gets out there about 45 minutes ahead of time
Wow.
to try to sell some t-shirts. John goes out about 30 minutes ahead of time, and then I'll come in 15 minutes or so ahead of time. Now, does it hurt a little bit in the impact you make when you hit the stage? Yeah, but sometimes it helps because people come out and say just what you said. Man, we couldn't believe you were out there. It was so great to talk to you before the concert. And so I think you lose a little on the star
The
impact,
mystique or whatever. Yeah.
but yeah, but you gain some in the fact that you have made a connection before you even walk on the stage. And this genre is built around relationships and connections. You're
Yeah.
connecting with the people in the audience. You're building relationships. It's really the only genre I know built around relationships as much as it's built around the music.
Yeah. I think you started. So I grew up north, and I didn't know anything about Southern gospel till I was late teens.
Wow.
So those two things hurt me from seeing so much of the era of the first concerts you saw. I mean, JD had passed away by the time I discovered Southern Gospel,
Mm.
and Glenn had passed away. Um, I just barely missed George's final concert. It was promoted in my area. I tried to talk my parents into it because I wasn't driving yet and couldn't quite talk them into it. Of course, nobody knew at the time it was his final concert, but
Sure. Sure.
so I knew who he was before he passed away, but didn't see him live. So there's this era you saw of the stars of that era. By the time it's mid 2000s, middle of that first decade, and I'm going to concerts, there's almost nobody who's staying back in the bus by that point. I mean, okay, Ernie Haas's Signature Sound is a different story. They were
Sure.
events when they
Right.
first hit the scene, and there are a few other examples, but like almost every group I went, like I could go see the Blackwood Brothers and Jimmy's down there with everybody.
Right.
And
Right.
if anybody has rights in that group to be considered the star of the group, is Jimmy, and he's down there with
Sure.
So I think I experienced Southern Gospel a few years after you did, and I didn't really experience going and seeing many concerts where the best known singer wasn't out there before
Yeah.
that. So just a
I
few year difference.
I went to my first concert in '85, and it was the Masters 5,
Oh, wow.
and none of them were at the table.
Yep.
I mean, not even Steve Warren.
Yeah.
So, and again, when I'd go, you'd have the 1 or 2, workers, and then the stars came out later. But it changed, when, the table started changing. We need to be out there. Hey guys, we need to be out there. I remember Mark Trammell when I first joined him. He said, "Hey guys, we need to be out there." That was his doing, and it was a 30-minute window. Let's get out there 30 minutes before the program. That was kind of the thought process. If you're out there an hour before the program, you're standing at your table lonely like a yard sale at 2 in the
Hmm.
afternoon, and nobody's coming. But if you get out there about a half hour before and you're able to greet the people, hug some folks next, and so that has been a big change since the time that I first saw concerts.
Yeah. I don't know if Mark was doing it as much in the first couple years he was on the road, because my first live Southern Gospel concert was the Mark Trammell Trio.
Okay.
And Eric Phillips was the only one at the table.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew who Mark was, but I didn't know the other members of the group at the time. And I still laugh at myself years later. It was like a 50th anniversary for a Baptist church in the area, and everybody was dressed in suits and ties. And the thought, seriously, that went through my mind was, "Oh, that's cool. They got one of the local kids to run the table for them." I had no
He's
idea he
still
was one of the
he's still
singers.
I saw him a couple of weeks ago. He still looks like one of the local kids.
Yeah. And I came up on
Uh,
stage and I was like, "Oh my goodness, he's one of the members of the group, and he's a
that's
really good
funny.
singer too."
That's
Um,
funny.
but every concert thereafter that I saw the trio and then the quartet, everybody was down there.
Yeah.
So I think and kind of expanding on this idea a little more, one of the most unique and special aspects of Southern Gospel is the fan and artist interaction, but also how artists interact with everyone else. Media outlets in my case, but media, radio, uh, record labels, you name it. Of course, there's always a few exceptions, but in the years I was running the blog, and then the years I worked for Crossroads, I came across just an incredibly high, well north of 95% of the people in this style of music talk to fans, media, everybody else with just this graciousness and warmth and humility and thankfulness. It never failed to blow my mind how even the biggest stars would just thank me for talking about their music. And I'm thinking, Mark Trammell doesn't need me, that kind of thing. But I saw them treat everybody else the same way. I know it
Right.
wasn't like I was getting special treatment. And so I've always wondered, but never been quite brave enough to ask anyone, this way that artists interact with the fans and everybody else in our style of music, is that just something that seeped into your bones from growing up around this, loving it, seeing others do it? Or is this something that there was like a generation of old timers that taught the new kids coming along, this is how you talk to people?
I can only speak to my experience. It was
Hmm.
me seeing it. It was
Okay.
me experiencing it. I
Hmm.
mean, I got to talk to JD Sumner when I was 13, 14 years old. I went to see Gold City when it was Ivan and Brian,
Hmm.
and got to talk to them, got to ask them questions, got advice. I remember went to see the Cathedrals in 95, maybe High and Lifted Up had just come out, that album,
Yeah.
and they came to Gadsden, Alabama. They did every year, and so I went to see them, and they did a Q&A during the concert. They did a
Hmm.
3-hour concert,
Wow.
and for about 20 minutes, they did a Q&A from the stage. You could make requests, you could ask questions. So I asked, "What advice would you give to someone who wants to do this for a living?" Yeah,
Hmm.
standard question. And, Ernie spoke a little bit, and George said, "I'll just tell you, you need to sing everywhere you get a chance to sing." And he gave great advice. And then the concert was over, and it was about an hour later after that Q&A that they ended the concert. And I went up to the stage where George was. George didn't go to the table. And just said, enjoyed it so much. And he said, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but one day you're going to be doing exactly what I did tonight. And I just want you to know that. I feel like you're gonna be doing exactly what I did." And then, of
Wow.
course, 20 years later, I'm doing the Cathedral Family Reunion.
Hmm.
And so he took the time out with people clamoring, um, to just speak into me for a minute. And I've gotten that from almost every artist. I mean, there has
Hmm.
been, out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists I've talked to, 1 or 2, wouldn't give me the time of day. The rest of them, as kind and as thoughtful. Sue Dodge, I talk about her all the time. I used to work handing out microphones at the Grand Ole Gospel Reunion. That was my job. I would
Hmm.
hand microphones to the old timers, and she took time to talk to me, to pour into me, had no clue who I was. I wasn't singing. And so I do it because the people before me did it to me. So there may be bosses who say, "Hey, boys, listen, we need radio and we need these folks. So, put on you big boy pants
Hmm.
and go out and be sweet." But for me, I do it because they did it for me. And,
Neat.
hopefully it passes on to where someone decides they do it because I showed them some kindness, and it just keeps going.
Very neat. So, pivoting to look at Southern gospel from a different angle, songs. From a songwriting standpoint, Southern gospel in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s, was kind of like the CCM of its day. There were a lot of pop culture references, references to current technology,
Mhm,
and the songs were just really cool and current.
mhm.
Uh, and there were some exceptions, but they weren't always that deep or that theological. Um, but this really changed around the 80s. I feel like in the late 70s into the early 80s when songwriters started writing more songs with more depth and scripture and good theology in the lyrics. Uh, why? And I'm not asking you to agree with exactly how I assess the songs, but there is this shift I think that we can probably both see, even if you describe
Oh,
it with
yeah.
slightly different wording. Why do you think this changed? Why artists were willing to record deeper songs, but also radio willing to play them, fans willing to hear them and buy them at the product table. It had to be an industry wide shift to be okay with um, going into songs with a little more depth to them, a little more meat on the bone.
Yeah, I've thought about this. Diane Wilkinson, who we
Mm-hmm.
both loved
Mm-hmm.
dearly,
Yeah.
she told Dustin Sweatman, who we
Mm-hmm.
both loved dearly,
Mm-hmm.
because he asked a similar question. Of course, both of them are in heaven now, but he
Yeah.
had asked a similar question of her. And she said, "Honey, I've noticed that God has seasons for songwriters,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see ebbs and flows. And it seems like all the songwriters that are tapped in to the Spirit all kind of flow in the same direction at the same time because
Mm-hmm.
God knows what the people need to hear." And so I have kind of taken that with me, and it does seem to be the case that songwriters all kind of flow in the same direction, and then the listener kind of goes with them because this genre is very. I talked about the relationships. It is very song driven.
Mm-hmm.
It is more about the song than almost I would say any genre in all of music. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I look at the 30s, 40s, 50s, all of that. Yeah, there is a lot of pop culture. I remember hearing a song the Sunshine Boys sang about the atomic bomb. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there was things like that that you had to go through. And then, of course, there were some deep theological writers in the 50s and 60s. But then you do see that shift. And I think there was a shift also where a lot of the songs were very personal. And then maybe you see songs in the 80s and 90s that start going to the glory of God, and they are a little more general, not so much personal. They're more kind of heaven
Mm-hmm.
driven than they are inward driven. And I think we can thank Gaither for that. We can thank
Yeah.
Dottie for that. You know, Gaither kind of invented inspirational music,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was a catalyst for what came after. And so, I give the shift credit, of course, to God, but I think he did it through the songwriters. I think the songwriters set the tone. But now, let's be honest, there's a lot of fans that still don't really enjoy a deep theological song. I remember, and you will love this. I remember when I first joined Mark Trammell, we were still singing songs off of the album you called the greatest quartet song album without a bass singer.
Mm-hmm. The one that had Loving
Always
the
have a
Lamb on
song.
it. Always have a
We
song.
were
Yeah.
still singing Loving the
Yes.
Lamb and those kind. And I asked him, I said, why don't we sing If Only Just a Few? That's my favorite song off the album. Why don't we do it?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's just too deep. The audience just doesn't connect with it. It just goes, not all the audience. He wasn't calling them dumb.
Mm-hmm.
It's just when you're in a live setting like that, sometimes a song is just a little too deep for a live audience to comprehend. And so, you have limits as to what the crowd will accept and not accept. But for the most part, yeah, I agree with you. But I give the credit to the songwriters.
I to that song, if only just a few. I had the blessing, I guess, to catch them early enough when that album had come out that they were still singing it. Because
Hmm.
I don't think it was just once. I think I heard Mark sing it live at least twice,
Sure.
and it was something to hear him
Oh
sing it
yeah.
live. It just that of course I love the deeper songs are what drew me in. Like
Right.
I grew up around contemporary Christian music, and there are occasions, you got certain artists. Steve Green will have some deep songs, Michael Card, etc. But most of what you hear on radio isn't. So when I discovered Southern Gospel and discovered some of the deeper songs, I was like, okay, I'm in. This is
Right.
this is where this is where I want to be. Yeah,
Correct.
very interesting. Now, looking at Southern Gospel from a different angle of more stylistic influences, I'm not sure it's happening as much as it used to. But there was a period when a number of Southern gospel artists, you could find several at any given point, incorporating influences from what contemporary Christian music was doing about 20 years before that point.
Hmm.
So when I came in and started in the mid 2000s, there were artists, incorporating influences from the Steve Green, Sandy Patty, Larnell Harris era and the big orchestrations. Um, inspired by Greg Nelson, but Larry Goss and Wayne Hawn and some others in that era. And then you move on into the teens, and you have artists incorporating more influences from like For Him, Phillips, Craig, and Dean. And each of these eras brought value and brought new fans. I was one of them. I love Steve Green's style of music. That's another aspect. I love the kind of music that Steve Green did and couldn't find it anymore in CCM, and found that style of music as well as some great lyrics in Southern Gospel. And that was my entry point. And it didn't take long for me to fall in love with the convention songs and everything else. But the Steve Green style stuff, like Greater Vision was doing, or The Cathedral Till
Right.
Death Has Died, even that's a few years before that point, but
Sure.
a kind of precursor to what would come. So I love that. But with these influences all still present, and all the other influences Southern Gospel has had through the years, country from the Hinsons through today, bluegrass from the Isaacs and other groups through today, you name it. What would you say defines Southern Gospel musically today, if it's even fair or possible to define it musically?
It's not possible.
Okay.
It used to be. It's funny when someone posts, well, that's not Southern gospel. Gerald Wolfe will almost always put in the comments, what is Southern gospel?
Mm-hmm.
And you never get an answer. And so I'm okay with the umbrella being wide enough that I can't define it. Um, we know what CCM is, and we know what Black gospel is, and we know what those are, and those are great genres, and I listen
Mm-hmm.
to all of them. I love them. But I love that we have the Isaacs. I love that I can claim the Isaacs under my umbrella,
Mm-hmm.
even though I could never in a million years sing what they sing the way they sing it. And I can have the Isaacs, I can have the Gaither Vocal Band,
Mm-hmm.
I can have McCamey Legacy, I can have the Rochesters, but I can also have Legacy 5, and I can have Ernie Haas, and I can have a Memphis Quartet show right across the street from, a Gaither event,
Mm-hmm.
and they all fall under the same umbrella. I'm okay with that. I like the fact that I can't define it because it allows for a lot more, to me, a lot more adversity, a lot more talent to come in. I mean, we can claim Taranda. I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
gracious, what
Yeah.
a singer. So
Yeah.
I can have her under my umbrella? Absolutely. I'll take it
Neat.
all day.
Yeah. We were going back to it's the songs. I think it's the content of our lyrics does more to define Southern Gospel than any musical style component.
That's fair. That's absolutely it is. It's very Jesus centered. It's very
Mm-hmm.
salvation centered. It's it's a lot about what's happening to us on the inside and what God is
Mm-hmm.
doing through us and what our life experiences are. It's a perfect marriage of what country music used to be and what gospel music is. It's just a lot more personal uh, to what's happening to us than, say, a contemporary artist might be.
Yeah. There's the personal component to the lyrics, and there is when Southern Gospel is talking about a theological concept, a concept from the Bible,
Mm,
sometimes it's the blood, the cross, the second coming, or a whole number of other things like power in these bones from the Kingdom Heirs is one of the most obscure passages you could ever find in the scripture to write a song from. And
right.
Arthur Rice and Diane Wilkinson pulled it off and wrote a passage about the prophet whose body was cast into the bones and the bones came to life, and it turned it into an amazing song.
Right.
But I think there's this thing that I can't quite put the right words on it, but I have this thought in my head that I'm hard time articulating right. Uh, but all I can do is contrast it with somebody whose music I also love. Andrew Peterson is a CCM
Oh,
artist
yeah.
who
Wonderful.
who's some wonderful, thoughtful lyrics
Yeah.
and some great singing too. But the way he would approach the same passage as a Southern gospel writer will be more abstract.
Yeah.
um when a Southern gospel writer is talking about their testimony or talking about something from scripture, it is straightforward, maybe not in your face in a bad way, but you will have no question about what they're talking about. It's the gospel component, and the scripture component, testimony component is all very straightforward. Like there's
Right.
that component to how a Southern gospel song is written lyrically, and it could have just about any musical style you could imagine. The other component being prominent harmonies.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Because other genre like singer-songwriter, it doesn't matter who's background vocals or not. It's around
Right.
one singer's voice.
Right.
Other genres have some harmonies, but even you have like how For Him, a big Southern gospel influence of Brand Free Insurance and some other groups, how they would do harmonies back in the day. There'd be 3 or 4 parts going, but the lead would be very dominant in the mix. Southern
Right.
gospel has harmony parts that are up in the mix.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, and I think that's one of the things that draws audiences to Southern gospel is the harmony. Because in their churches, they're hearing that one singer with some folks maybe behind them, and it's songs that just aren't that familiar, or it's, it's more of an, and I'm not complaining, it's more of a light show sometimes than it
Mhm.
is a worship experience. And so I think you get some of those folks who just miss harmony and they miss singing together. And I think that's one of the things that draws folks to Southern gospel and has for 100 years.
Yeah. So much of the best of the history of Southern gospel isn't on streaming. Canaan Records, Heartwarming Records, you name it. There's some, but even some of the best from some of the biggest labels aren't on streaming,
Right.
and a surprising amount isn't even on YouTube. And that's overall a bad thing. Something I
Yes.
hope changes because it would be good for somebody who's just discovered the cathedrals to go back and hear their Canaan releases.
Hmm.
They can hear a couple of them. Like you can hear something
Right.
specials on streaming and a couple others, but the trade-off is that Southern gospel is one of the few spaces left anywhere in music where a new fan can experience something that we both experienced 20 plus years ago, where we didn't have the instant gratification of hearing everything immediately, but on the flip side, we got the extra delight in listening to something that took years to track down before we could finally
Hmm.
hear it. What are some good starting points for new fans getting into this music? If somebody I have a hard time imagining how they made it this far into the conversation, but if there's a new Southern Gospel fan,
Yeah. If
if
they don't
they've
know
never heard of
anything
Southern
about this.
Gospel, but this can be useful as we think about how we talk about Southern Gospel to our friends. We who are listening. What are some good starting points to point people to? Both recordings, classic recordings that you loved through the years, the ones that are online, but maybe some of the ones that you like that aren't so well known and might take some time to track down.
I love, because it was the first album I heard, I love Live on Stage from the Blackwood Brothers.
Mhm.
And that one is easily available on YouTube. I would, one of the first things I would do, honestly, is go on YouTube and I would type in the Blackwood Brothers full albums,
Mhm.
the Statesman's full albums, the Cathedrals full albums. Type in any group that you've heard about on a Gaither program or you've heard your granddaddy talk about or whatever, and go in and listen to full albums. That's one of the things that, when we were doing the last recording, I was given the Guardians, I was given the privilege of putting the songs in order.
Hmm.
That is something I take very seriously because I grew up putting the needle down on track one and listening all the way through side A, flipping it over, putting the needle down, and listening all the way through side B. And they took the order of songs very seriously.
Mhm.
And so I did too. And in this age of streaming where you can just pick a song, pick a song, pick a song, pick the song that's got the star next to it because it must be the most popular. Those days are coming to an end where you're building something through an entire album. And so I would encourage younger folks because albums are still very big right now.
Mhm.
My kids only buy records.
Mhm.
That's all they buy. We've got 4 record players at our house and not one CD player. So they buy records of their favorite artists. And so I would say go on YouTube and hit full albums of these groups that you've heard about. Another album that I would settle in, kids, and just give yourselves about 40 minutes to soak in the garden.
Oh, yes.
It is not going to thrill you. It is
Mhm.
not going to get you up and clapping, but it will absolutely put you in another world if you go back and listen to. in the Garden by the Weatherfords,
Yes.
and give Weatherfords the credit for groups like the Cathedrals and all of those,
Mhm.
and go back and listen to the Imperials before they were contemporary. Listen to some
Mhm.
of these groups before they made switches. Go back and listen to some old Oak Ridge Boys gospel album from the early days. And I guarantee you, this is what I tell people: if we will get kids listening to the good stuff, they're hooked.
Yeah.
It's over. They will be in. My kids are the same way. They listen to the Kingdom Heirs
Mhm.
more than just about anybody. They love, because when I was getting ready to sing at Diane Wilkinson's memorial service,
Mhm.
I was listening to a lot of those Diane songs with with the Kingdom Heirs. Kids are in the car and they were eating it up. And to this day, they still want to hear Jeff Chapman more than they want to hear me. But that's fine. I don't blame them. So I would do that. I have Gaither TV Plus. This is not a plug for Gaither. I have Gaither TV Plus, and I can go back and watch any of those old videos from 91 all the way up to the video from a few months ago. I have Singing News TV. So there's streaming out there
Mhm.
that plays some of that classic stuff and some of the new stuff. So it gets you a little bit of everything. So there's apps out there, but go on YouTube. I do it still. I mean, I still put in Cathedral's full albums and just search through and see what I want to listen to. So that would be where I started.
Neat. Thank you. All right. So looking at it from a whole different angle, which is a big part of your world, is touring. And you mentioned you're the concert manager for the Guardians.
Hmm.
So you're really engaged in this side of things. Uh, so 25 years ago, and then further beyond that, the leading groups toured a circuit that contained a lot of auditorium ticketed concerts.
Hmm.
Like that's the traditional old school Southern gospel circuit. And that definitely isn't gone, but it has shrunk a lot. And more Southern gospel is happening in the church,
Hmm.
church concerts. What are some of the blessings, but also some of the trade offs of this shift that you've lived through? Because when you first came on and started joining groups, there were a lot more auditorium concerts than there are now, as I would understand it.
Yeah, I would say again, that's an ebb and flow thing.
Yeah.
I would say Southern Gospel started in the church,
Mm-hmm.
and then with the Quartet Convention, with the Blackwoods, with the Statesman, now you're doing a lot of these auditoriums, these all night sings. You're at the Ellis Auditorium, you're in Birmingham, you're at the Boutwell, and then I would say honestly, in the late '60s, '70s, with the Hensons and the Goodmans and some of these groups coming on that were more family groups, more church groups, it kind of went back into churches.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I say Gaither a lot, but he deserves a lot of credit. With that tour, now you're looking at auditoriums kind of being where you need to put a lot of these groups. And as you say, now it is moving back to where there's a lot of churches. The good thing about that is, I love singing in the churches more than the auditoriums. I think you get a better spirit in
Mm-hmm.
those churches more than you get in the auditorium. I love the auditoriums. We're doing 3 auditoriums starting off this coming weekend with Bill Bailey. So I love doing the auditorium sings, but there's something about settling at a church, and everybody just seems to be a little more in unity, a little more willing to worship and to have this spirit of worship. um, the downside, honestly, would probably be the money. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna be
Yeah.
honest.
Fair enough.
You're not gonna get, the flats that we call them. You're not gonna get the flats from a church that you might get from a ticketed event at an auditorium, and so there is some trade-off there, and, honestly, there's some churches that, "Well, I'm not going to that church," but they'll go
Mm-hmm.
to the
To a
Performing
neutral
Arts Center.
place.
Right.
Yeah.
So, neutral sites can bring in more people, and churches, sadly, can sometimes be a dividing point for some folks. So there is the good and the bad, but that comes with anything. With an auditorium,
Mm-hmm.
that's a tougher setup. It's tougher to try to get things loaded in, loaded out. You're working with the auditorium sound crew, trying to figure out what you can plug in and plug out. You don't really have those issues in churches. So you got to be ready for any of that kind of trade-off, and you do a different concert for an auditorium,
Hmm.
than you do for church services. There's things that I'll do in an auditorium that, I probably wouldn't try, in most churches, but, that's how it should be.
If you don't mind me following up on that, what is something that would work in an auditorium that wouldn't work in a church so well, or the other way around?
The way you set up songs,
Okay.
let's say in a church service, I'm gonna wanna start off more with a Lord's Prayer or a Gentle Shepherd as the cathedrals would do,
Hmm.
or I wanna start off with something that kind of sets the tone just a little bit. When you're in an auditorium, the promoter really wants you to hit, come out,
Hmm.
you know, guns a-blazing.
Hmm.
And so, the way you set up a concert is different, the way you end is different. And when you do an auditorium, you may be doing 30 minutes because you're splitting it with 3 or 4 other groups.
Hmm.
You got a church all by yourself, you're doing an hour and a half to 2 hours. So, you can play off a crowd differently. In an auditorium, I'm going to be a little looser. The crowd is going to actually be talking to me. I have that happen all the time where they just start talking to me. And I feel a little more comfortable playing off of them than I would maybe in a church. You kind of have to tether that a little bit. So it's a different mentality. It really is.
Hmm. So this is something we've touched on at a number of different from a number of different angles over the course of the conversation, but I'll touch on it a little more directly here. With the shift away from buying recorded music and the changes in the Southern Gospel circuit, fewer flats, etc. What are the best ways for fans to support artists today and to help the music, help the style of music make it through the current cultural and technological changes?
Go to the concerts.
Hmm.
Don't sit at home. Don't try to find it on Facebook somewhere that you can sit and watch for free. Go to the concert, support them, clap, cheer, go to the table, love on them, support them, pray for them. Those kind of things are very important.
Hmm.
Share it with people who have no idea what this music is. I mean, when I discovered Southern Gospel music, I was telling everybody at school. Now they didn't care,
Hmm.
but I told them. I told them that JD made the floors rattle, and I told them that George was funny, and I would share music with my friends, and so don't keep it to yourself. Share it with the people you go to work with, and let them know, hey, are you frustrated with the music at your church? Listen to this. This is a little different. You might like this. Don't hide it, and then give. I mean, most groups now, I don't think we do, but most groups now have a button on their website that says donate. There's a handful of groups I started donating to in COVID, and I never stopped. It comes
Hmm.
out a few bucks every month, and I don't even notice it. And so,
Neat.
if you've got groups that you want to support, almost all of them have donate buttons that they created at COVID, and they're still there, and you can give monthly to these groups, and you can share their music, and you can do all of these things, and that's really the only way that it's going to survive. Honestly,
Yeah.
is everybody working together to get the word out.
Yeah. Amen. Now, ho- whole different angle, but we're talking about cultural and technological changes. Do you have any thoughts on the impact of AI, artificial intelligence, on Southern Gospel?
Well, I've met Jeff Easter, so I know what artificial intelligence looks like. It's
Uh,
that was a joke I told at Singing News. Jeff and Jeff and Sherry and I were co-hosting the Singing News Fan Award, and somebody said something about AI, and Jeff said, "What's AI?" And I said, "That's what Sherry's lived with for 30 years, artificial intelligence." So I love that joke. But um, you've seen it in country music. I mean, the number one song in country music a few weeks ago was an AI song.
mhm.
The number one song in Christian music
I heard that.
uh, was an AI song. And that's in streaming. That's not
Yeah.
radio and those kinds of things. That's in streaming. So it's here, and I guarantee you, where it's going to hit first is demos, songwriters demos.
Mhm.
That's where it's going to hit first, and people will start to get used to it, and they will start to warm up to it a little bit because it's cost effective, and you can barely tell the difference. But I'm going to go back to what Larry Goss said.
Okay.
Larry Goss said this probably 30 plus years ago. He said it to me maybe 10 years ago because I asked him about it. Maybe it was Gerald who told me this. Somebody asked Larry, "Why do you always use a real orchestra?"
Hmm.
And Larry's answer was, "A violin will always sound like a violin. A trumpet will always sound like a trumpet." So just because you think it sounds like everything else and it sounds real, 10 years from now, that Casio keyboard is not going to sound like a violin.
Hmm.
It's going to sound like a Casio keyboard.
Hmm.
So I'm always going to lean on the fact that our audience is going to want it to be real. They're going to want it to be authentic. And I just, if it creeps into Southern gospel, I just don't see it having a hold on our audience. It may take a hold of everything else, but with the relationships that we build and all those things, I just don't see our audience, and hopefully, I don't see our artists trying to push it. But it's not something that we need to just go whatever,
Yeah.
because it has the ability to creep in like a lot of other things have.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I will say, like, songwriter demos, something that the public never hears is one thing.
Right.
Excuse me. But it's something very different when it's something the public hears. And what Southern gospel has is relationships. You
Yep.
know, the the biggest part of the Southern gospel experience is going to live concerts and hugging your favorite artist before or after the concert, sharing with them what's on your heart. You can't do that with an AI artist. It's never going to happen.
No, you cannot.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. We're getting toward wrapping up.
Yeah.
Just a fun one. I thought it'd be fun because that could be. There are a couple challenging things Southern Gospel's dealing with right now, but I didn't
Mm,
want to end with a challenge. I wanted to end with something a little more fun.
thank you.
So, suppose Bill Gaither retired and left you the Homecoming series to carry on, or suppose you created a modern successor to the Homecomings. How might you approach putting a Homecoming style tour together? Before you answer, I want to limit the question a little bit. I'm
All
not
right.
going to ask you to name which of the current leading artists you'd invite because there's always a risk of you didn't mention somebody hurt feelings. I don't want to put you in that position. We know who
Right.
anybody who's made it this far in the interview knows who the leading artists are, and they would be incorporated in a tour of this style. So we can just set that part aside. So I'm going to come at it from a different angle. Homecomings had established stars and up and coming young artists. But the big spark plug of the series, I think, was Gaither bringing back the legends who had semi retired and were working less or touring less,
Mhm.
like Jake Hess, James Blackwood, Howard, and Vestal Goodman. So maybe we can focus on those last two categories. If you were putting a homecoming style tour together, who are some up and coming artists you might include, and who are some living legends you might bring back?
Um, I don't know if I can. First off, if I take over the Homecoming series, the first
Hmm.
thing I do is create a sign that says Homecoming series going out of business. That I don't know if I'm the guy, but uh, I don't know if I could call them up and coming,
Okay.
but I would have Joseph Habedank there.
Yeah, that's a good
I
call.
would have the Mylan Hayes family there.
Hmm.
I would have honestly, I love the Chitons. I would have the Chitons there. They're
Yes.
fantastic.
Yes.
Such a sweet family, and they do such a great job. So there's things like that, where and another thing that Gaither did that was genius was everybody was different. You would have
Hmm.
a Janet Paschal, and then you would have the Martins,
Hmm.
and then you would have the Isaacs, and then you might have Vestal come up, and everything was very different. So it's got to be variety. It can't be an all quartet show, and it
Yeah.
can't be solo driven or things like that. So I love having Joseph is just such a wonderful singer, and people like that. Established, you got to have the Isaacs. You gotta have a triumphant,
Hmm.
would be a part of that. They've obviously, um, sealed theirselves, Ernie and those guys. I would also have Sue Dodge coming in.
Hmm.
She still tours and is still busy, but you've gotta have some of those legendary names, and
Yeah.
so Sue would be coming in, the Blackwoods would be coming in, Ann Downing,
Hmm.
would be coming in. I know she has some health struggles, but that's those kind of names that we don't need to forget. We don't need to act like they're not there anymore because they are, and they're still, bringing everything they can bring. So, it, and then of course I would feature me for probably 45 minutes to an hour because that's just how I am. But
Uh,
then, I would also introduce some music that maybe the audience has never heard before.
mhm.
Don't think for a second that I wouldn't have Sovereign Grace coming up and
Neat. Yeah.
singing before the concert started. I'd have some music like that that would kind of set the tone. So it would be very different from
Mhm.
what Gaither is able to do. But he's the best. So, hopefully the rapture happens before he retires. Because I don't need to be in charge of that.
Neat. All right. So we've talked about a little bit here and there. But you're with the Guardians right now. How can fans keep up with what the Guardians are doing and what you're doing? Mention any social media channels, websites, anything like that you'd like to mention.
Sure. Yeah, we've made it easy. It's guardiansquartet.com. Guardiansquartet.com. That gets you everything. There's a great app called Bands in Town that a lot of the artists are on. Download that app. It's free. And you can put in your favorite groups and you can follow them. And when they come in your area, you get a little email and it lets you know that your favorite group is in the area. So we do a lot through Bands in Town, Facebook. I am in charge of all the social media. So I'm posting our schedule all the time on Facebook because people will come up and they'll say, "We had no idea you were here till this morning. I popped on Facebook and saw that y'all were going to be in town." So I do a lot of posting on Facebook, a little bit on Instagram, but I've got to do better in 2026 on Instagram. So guardiansquartet.com is going to be your starting point, and then everything kind of goes from there.
Everything's linked from there.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. It's always good to catch up with you, my brother.
Likewise. And to the listeners, thank you for listening to Southern Gospel Journal. Keep up with the latest episodes on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, or on southerngospeljournal.com. Thanks for listening.